Our next speaker is Professor Dibesh Anand of Westminster University. He has been a long friend of the Tibetan movement, and he is also someone we can go to and rely on for help whenever we needed it, whether it's at Westminster University or to speak at our events. We really appreciate that. Thank you. Professor Dibesh Anand. Professor Dibesh Anand imena ngaju bedela lo manguchi ne kapyo nange chire and dimase ngaju de tanda inyu le yebe ngaju phiri chopa da ta phebe ki chopa sui ne pra la phatui ne chi ngaju kapju shusa tab de uchi che pra e de cha de ye and in de pra de pel kasna.
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you to Tibetan community of UK and all other NGOs that invited us here. In fact, when Dolpur Esa was talking of coronavirus, and as you know, we all start with coronavirus these days, and he said what I wanted to say, which is fine, but there's something weird in this world. Like, did you read, there was a news item today of how Xi Jinping is finally visiting Wuhan, and there's a lot of news in Western media of how China got it right, and now we are so bad, right? And forgetting that most people who have been killed by coronavirus are in China. And the reason it spread in the first place is because, of course, the way in which Chinese authoritarian system functions is you suppress the news, right? You suppress the news, that is why it spread so badly. So it's a very weird phenomenon in the world, but it's not that weird, where Chinese propaganda doesn't need to be paid for by the Chinese government. Often it can be self-inflicted here in the West and other parts of the world, where we start sort of craving for authoritarian government. So we do no longer like democratic governments because they can say opposite things. So we start fantasizing Xi Jinping. So in fact, I would say there is that danger of CCP. But even bigger danger is that almost a fantasy for strong leader and strong party that various societies seem to have. Because the problem, of course, when we look at East Turkestan, Tibet, Hong Kong, China, various parts of the world, it could include Kashmir, Palestine, Kurdistan, Balochistan, we can talk of various other countries. The problem in each and every place is, where one is quite simple. A fantasy that majority people have, that they should have a strong leader and a strong party or strong government that can deal with extremists, separatists, terrorists. Now, when we say extremists, separatists, terrorists, frankly, we would all be defined as extremists, separatists, and terrorists according to the Chinese government, right? So that's the kind of extremism, separatism, and terrorism we are talking about. But the governments have been very successful at that. And at one level, this is a battle we have to fight. And I'm saying this battle because coronavirus will disappear one day, right? Hopefully very soon, without taking too many lives. But the surveillance and intrusion and the loss of liberty that people are willing to give up to be protected by the state might stay in place. And I'm reminded of 9/11. After 9/11, what you had was so many liberties were taken up by the government, and we said it's okay so long as you're fighting the bad Muslim terrorists somewhere, right? Now the idea would be so long as you're fighting the virus. Now, when you look at language of virus, it's a very interesting language because the way in which, for instance, Chinese government treats Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kong people, and anyone who dares to oppose Chinese government, is that they all are seen as not only extremists, terrorists, and separatists and everything, but also as virus, as dangerous. Those we have to control. And you mentioned about Holocaust. The language of Holocaust was language of cleanliness, that Jews are dangerous pests that need to be removed from the German society to create a pure society. So there's a fantasy, pure society, for instance, that the Chinese government has, where Uyghurs and Tibetans and other people who oppose either should just keep quiet, be happy, and sing and dance, always happy, right? And I often remind my other friends, Tibetans know it, so non-Tibetans sometimes get up, right? That the China's Tibet, a particular magazine, a propaganda magazine of Chinese government, since 1989, not a single issue has an image of Tibetan who's crying. It's always a smiling Tibetan. So you can have fire, you can have self-immolation, you can have flood, you can have earthquake, you can die, you can be killed through cultural genocide, but you'll always be smiling. The only image, therefore, of Uyghurs and Tibetans, and we saw with Uyghurs now, of very colorful Uyghurs, very glamorous ones, they're portraying, and what common is, China becomes the modernizing force. So China is liberating you. China has already liberated you, of course, right? Liberated you, and it keeps reminding that we have liberated you. If you don't like it, too bad. We'll slap you, we'll kill you, we'll put you under concentration camp, but just be thankful to the Beijing, to central government, that we have liberated you. That language of liberation is connected to the first title there, illegal occupation. That language of liberation is language of colonization. Now, one thing which Chinese government will actually ban a word would be colonization. If you say China is a colonizing power, they say, no, we are never a colonizer, because of course we are victims of colonization. But the fact that you're a victim of colonization doesn't mean anything. US is a victim of colonization at one point in time, and it is a colonizer in various sense. India is a victim of colonization, it has become colonizer in various places. All countries, or various countries do it. So in case of China, of course, and that's as a scholar, I always try to look at different things. I would never say since 1959, I say since 1951. Because it has been an illegal occupation since 1951. Now what makes 51 to 59 important is, the way we can say is, first they had no option, right? But Tibetans, the Dalai Lama, gave an opportunity to Chinese government to work together, right? That was the promise, that they are giving an opportunity to Chinese government, who had promised that they are not going to bring about any fundamental transformation without the consent of the Tibetan government, right? So, while it was an illegal occupation since 1951 and not 1959, 51 to 59 in a way was a period where the Tibetan government are giving opportunity to China to see whether it actually fulfills promises or not. Now, those of us who have studied would know that, and this is where, why His Holiness is very crucial. Another word that has to be kept in mind is national. Tibetan nation goes beyond one single leader. We all know it. Dalai Lama tried to work with the Communist Party in 1950s. There was an uprising which he did not control. Of course, the Chinese government would like to imagine that he masterminds everything, right? He controls everything kind of thing, right? Okay, maybe many Tibetans also believe that he has that power. But when you look at the uprising was essentially an anti-colonial reaction of Tibetan people from Kham, the area initially, and Kham in particular, and then in central Tibet, wanting to protect His Holiness, right? So, the reason 59 becomes important, and this is why it's important for us to remember this again and again, it's not only the uprising part, it's what was behind the uprising. China was not suppressing Tibetans, they suppress it today, in 50s. And yet, Tibetans rose up. The reason I highlight this is because whether China uses soft power or hard power, whether it gives you money or gives you re-education, whether it sends PLA, which it keeps sending, or whether it uses surveillance, China can be a good, let's say, good development person, right? A development country that gives so much of money to Tibetans that, look, just develop. My understanding is still, and it's same in case of East Turkestan, the anti-colonial nature of the movements will ensure that the Chinese project of finishing off Tibetan nation and Uyghur nation will not succeed. It will not succeed because colonization and anti-colonial movement are never about development. China can become the richest country in the world, who knows, it can, right? And with the state of US, you never know, China can do certain things. But you do also know that essentially anti-colonial movements are about dignity, freedom. They're never about development, right? It's because by that logic, you know, Tibetans and Uyghurs say, okay, fine, you develop us, you kill us, right, from time to time, you control us, but provide us with development. It's never about development. And this is something we have to bear in mind, because the Chinese logic, the Chinese state logic is of development. Look, we are giving everything to you, we have liberated you, take it. They say, but I don't like it, right? So imagine, you have sugar, or I don't know, some people, but I keep giving you ice cream and sweet. It's bad for your health. But I say, but I'm giving you sweet, whether you like it or not. And that's what colonialism is, and that's what Chinese colonization is. Therefore, our focus as communities outside, but also for those of us in solidarity with you. In fact, there's more responsibility on us than on you. You are fighting a struggle for survival. At this point in time, of course, what Uyghurs are facing is extreme dehumanization. But we also know that the ways in which what certain leaders learned in Tibet, they're implementing in East Turkestan. And what they learn there, they'll implement in Tibet. And what they learn in both places, they'll implement in China. So the fact of the matter is, the largest scale victims of this kind of colonizations are not going to be Uyghurs and Tibetans, because number-wise they're still smaller. It would be Chinese people and possibly people outside, right? So as outsiders, what we have to bear in mind, and I'm including myself in this, is what can we do in solidarity with you? One thing is to recognize that it's your decision whether you call it, I mean, whether you want middle way or freedom or Ramzan. This is your debate, not our debate, right? It's very clear. Again, it's not about whether you want more rights within, or you want human rights, or you want freedom, or you want independence. Again, it's your choice. In fact, I would even say that as outsiders, we should not even judge the methods used. I'll tell you why. Because right now, of course, Tibetan movement is about peace, peace, peace. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know what would be the situation in 20 years' time. But as outsiders, one thing I can promise from my side, and this is my side, is I am not someone who judges the movement based on what strategy they're using, because whatever strategy you use and what you have used in 59, 61 and all those periods are to survive. That's a basic right any community has, right? So what we have to bear in mind, therefore, is the idea of uprising. Tibetans in Tibet even today, Uyghurs inside East Turkestan today, they are still rising up in whatever form they can. Right? Sometimes just the fact that they're surviving itself is big, right? But as outsiders, our role is to make sure that we are with you, and we are with you not because you're special. You're special, I have to say, I've worked with so many stateless nations, but there's something special, but let's not talk of that. But we have to be with you because your struggle is a struggle against colonization. Your struggle is against authoritarianism. Your struggle against this fascism of a very curious kind, because it's a communist form of fascism, but it is very much fascism, by the way, right? It's about that. But ultimately, your struggle is for compassion and freedom. And that note, I would say that what you said, I am here, till I am here in this world, I will be with you in solidarity for free Tibet. Thank you very much.